Welcome to this week's show of The Next Chapter. My name's Fred Hughes, Amazon best-selling author. The show where we talk about writing and authors and stories and anything that has to do with the written word. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about, hey, I've got a story. How do I get it published? Or what can I do with it? So I talked about last couple of episodes how to get it up on Amazon and how to maybe make a little bit of money about it. I scheduled a guest today, Mark Stallings, who of my friends, and he's a dear friend. He might be the best short story writer that I'm acquainted with personally. It's how he started in the business. So Mark is going to join us in a few minutes to talk about writing short stories and how to use them to become known as an author in the writing world. Whether that's self-publishing like we already talked about, whether that's submitting your story for an anthology, how to do it, how to go about it, all of that. So, enough said, we'll get to that in a minute. This week's shameless plug for Fred Hughes, Prince Dominator, the 8th book of my Prince of Britannia series, will be coming out. It's actually, as of this show, it will actually already be out. It's the 8th, and I can now say 8th of 9 books that'll be in the series. Follows a prince of the realm by the name of Hazard King, and you follow him from him being an ensign in the Imperial fleet until he becomes emperor. Anyway, that series is going to be finishing up. I just handed in book 9, which is, the title of that is Prince Imperator. Turn that into Chris Kennedy. That's scheduled for a mid-July release, and that will be the last book in the series. But never fear, the characters will live on. Already planned a follow-up series called Scions of Britannia, and it's about the offspring of some of the characters I created in this book and how they grow up to follow in their parents' footsteps. Anyway, enough said about that. In other news, Mark Stallings, who will be joining me, will be at the upcoming Fantasy Convention. It's in Raleigh, North Carolina. It is not, as of this show hitting the air, it is this weekend. If you're in the Carolinas, Virginia area, and you like science fiction and fantasy, should look it up and go. Lots of name fantasy and science fiction writers. My publisher, Chris Kennedy, is going to be there. Mark Stallings, today's guest, is going to be there. Kevin Eikenberry is going to be there. Casey Azell is going to be there. Lots of known authors. If you're a fan of science fiction or fantasy, or you have aspirations of writing, or maybe you've already written a science fiction and fantasy story, stop by and check it out. Be a good place to meet people, make connections. Another one of the things that Mark is going to talk about is making connections in the business so that when you write your book, you have someone to show it to who might be able to help you publish it, or even better yet, sell it. So, without further ado, here is Mark Stallings. Mark is a friend, author, sort of involved with my publisher, and one of the people I know who is really good at writing short stories, as I already told you. So, Mark, welcome to the show. I'm glad you could join us. So, short stories. You've written a few.
So I have. I've written quite a few.
Why? Why write a short story?
So in 2018, I was working on a novel and I realized that I needed to improve on story structure, uh, plotting, being able to have reasonable dialogue. I was doing all of the problems that beginning authors do with like floating voice where I'm not actually saying who's saying the things. So I entered into a an effort to do a whole bunch of short stories. I wanted to fail fast. And so the nice thing about short stories, especially if you're writing them to submit for anthologies and things like that, you're looking at 7 to 10,000 words. And so it seems daunting for a new writer, but 7 to 10,000 words actually is very constrained when you start writing, when the ideas start flowing. And so what I wanted to do is get a series of short stories out and in the world and try to basically improve my craft.
So, so you wrote all these short stories, and if, essentially you've published all of them one way or another, haven't you?
Yes, all but two. I have two short stories that are still kind of sitting on the desk because I don't know what I want to do with them. You improve your craft as you go, whether you're trying something out and getting feedback from an editor, or you submit to an anthology and get feedback from the person that's doing that collection. And so either the short stories are published in various anthologies, or I've self-published them out on KDP Direct.
Okay. And as the viewers know, we've talked about posting directly, independently publishing your stories. It's not any different for a story than it is for a novel that you've written. But the other thing, Mark, explain about getting rights back on a story.
So, especially for anthologies, it's very important as writers when you submit, you need to understand what the right reversion is, and that's basically what are the conditions that you'll get the rights back to that short story, where you can either resubmit it to another anthology or self-publish it. And so, most of the anthologies that I deal with have a 1 year term. You exclusively are in that anthology for that year period, and then the rights revert back to you. I do have a story in an anthology put out by William Allen Webb that the rights will never revert. But the converse there is that I get paid for it in perpetuity. As long as that anthology is being published, I'm getting paid, so I'm fine with that.
Okay. And that's one thing I want to basically, I don't call it a warning because that makes it sound dire, but it's just another one of those things you have to watch out for. Authors get excited, especially if it's like the first story anybody's shown an interest in, that, hey, oh yeah, I'm going to sign this, and find out that, hey, you've written a pretty good story and you just signed it away forever to somebody else if you don't read the fine
Right.
print in the contract. It's great that you get published and maybe you get noticed, especially if it's the right anthology or the right person putting the anthology out. And that's something else we'll talk about after, when we come back from the break, about, is this really an anthology I want my story to be in? But you have to understand, am I going to get the story back so I can do something else with it? Am I going? If they don't, am I going? How long am I going to get paid for it? How am I going to get paid for it? How much am I going to get paid for it? Those are all things you have to understand, and one of the reasons why I asked Mark to be on the show was to talk about all these things because, yeah, just like life, there are publishers out there that I'm sorry to say will take advantage of you. They would like nothing more than for you to sign over everything you have to them, and it all becomes theirs, excuse me. So when we come back from the break, Mark is going to talk about contracts with anthologies and what anthologies should you maybe avoid. Thanks for watching so far. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is The Next Chapter. And we're back, and I'm Fred Hughes. This is The Next Chapter, and I'm talking with my good friend Mark Stallings. So let's talk anthologies. We talked about writing short stories and submitting them for consideration by different publishers. What anthologies, what pitfalls should new writers pay attention to? I mean, in what anthologies should they go after? Or I guess even better yet, how did you get involved? How did you find out about submitting to anthologies?
So initially, I submitted to an anthology put on by Superstars Writing Seminar. They have an anthology that they put out every year, and it's for people that have attended the conference. And so that was my first short story, where it had a 5,000 word count, and my initial thoughts of, holy cow, I'll never be able to write 5,000 words. And then I actually started writing it. And then my thought quickly shifted from, how can I ever write 5,000 words? Because it seems daunting, to, holy cow, how can I only tell a story in 5,000 words? But after that, I started submitting to Chris Kennedy Publishing. He publishes a variety of open worlds where they collect various authors to write in those worlds. And so my first actual submission for an anthology was for the Four Horsemen universe. And unfortunately, it was declined. And then, going back, as I've skilled up as a writer, I look at that story and I understand why it didn't quite make the cut. So I told a reasonably decent story, but just how I told it just wasn't up to snuff, which is fine. So one of the things that I encourage people that are going to submit for anthologies is you need to be able to accept rejection. And so keeping that in mind, it's all about like baseball. You're going to step up to the plate and you're going to take your swing. And you're either going to connect and they'll buy your story or include you in an anthology, or you're going to get a rejection letter and you move on, right? I mean, you're always waiting for the next at bat. So one of the other things that I did, especially for writing short stories, is you want that feedback. It's very hard just getting rejection after rejection. And so I got involved with an organization called Writers of the Future. And the thing I like about Writers of the Future is they take a submission every quarter. They have 3 winners that they declare every quarter, and they give you some limited feedback. So if you're submitting a short story and you get an honorable mention, it's like good job. You have made it into the top 10% of these submissions. And then they have silver honorable mention, they have finalists, and they have winners. And so this is a great organization where it costs nothing to enter. As long as you follow the guidelines. They look for fantasy and science fiction, and you get an opportunity to submit a story every 90 days. I mean, that's fantastic, because as you're constantly trying to improve and get that feedback, depending upon how far your story goes, you can also rework it and then resubmit it. As it gets further, they'll actually give you comments when you get higher up in the the actual contest, when you hit a finalist, then they know who you are. Not necessarily, it's still blind, but they know your writing style and they're giving you feedback. So once you get to a certain point, then you're like, cool. I've actually get that sense of validation. You get the dopamine hit of an accomplishment and attaboy, and then you get to write the next short story or submit that short story to someplace else. I can tell you every story but one that I've submitted to Writers of the Future, I've been able to place either into an anthology or successfully self-published it.
And that's an important key, number one, and Mark hit it right on the head. You can't be scared of failing. If that's the direction you want to go, I mean, and there are a lot of ways, and we'll talk about this in future episodes, but there are a lot of people that start their career writing short stories, sort of like Mark did, and got noticed by publishers because they submitted short stories to them to get in an anthology. And I mean, I think this applied to you, didn't it, Mark? After you submitted several times to Chris Kennedy, he said, I like the story, now I want you to turn it into a novel.
Well, what we did was, so there's two different paths. So with Chris Kennedy Publishing specifically, I was accepted into an anthology for Set the Terms, and then that led to Matt Novotny and I collaborating on our novel. I was invited to submit to an anthology for Shadow Alley Press for their Viridian Gate Online series, and I didn't know anything about lit RPG or how their world worked. So I pulled down a couple books, I ripped through them, submitted a proposal to James. He liked it. I submitted the short story, and then we had a talk. He's like, wow, this is very dense. And while it's a decent short story, this really has enough plot in here to be a novel. Well, tip in the thing. But then because I wrote an Asian flavored story for his Viridian Gate Online, he's like, this doesn't quite fit with what we're trying to do for the anthology, but have you considered writing wuxia? And so then that led to me publishing my book, The Elements, through Shadow Alley Press. And so, it's short stories are the gateway to actually writing novels and getting you acknowledged. I mean, that's how Chris Kennedy finds new authors, is he opens up an anthology and he has a couple seats for new people. And then once you make it in and can prove that you can actually deliver a story and accept feedback. I mean, that's the other side of it. How do you handle the editor feedback for your comments on your story? How to make that story better? That's one of the things that I would encourage new authors is you need to be coachable. I mean, yes, this is your baby. However, this is a product. I mean, it's a product-oriented game, and your editors are interested in helping you put out the highest quality product, and you need to be receptive to that.
And those are the houses, whether it be publishers or whoever's handling the anthology that you want to join. Those are the ones you want to really participate in, because like Mark said, it sucks submitting stories and all you get back is an email saying, sorry, that all they're doing is blowing sunshine. We liked your story, but it wasn't what we were looking for. And that's as much feedback as you get. There's no, we didn't like the main character, or we didn't like the plot, or you kept switching between first and third person. They give you zero feedback, only that they don't want your story. So now what do you do with it? I mean, in some cases, you might submit it to another anthology, you might submit it to, because there are a ton of them out there, and we'll talk about that at the end of the day's show, different small publishers that specialize in anthologies. But you can't become paralyzed and say, I'm not writing anymore. So you resubmit it, you ask other people to take a look at it. But the important thing is getting the short story out there, because as I talked about novels, if you don't write it and you don't put it out there, you'll never know whether it's any good. After the break, we're going to talk more about anthologies and publishing. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is the next chapter. So we're back. I'm Fred Hughes. This is the next chapter, and I'm talking to Mark Stallings. And Mark, you teed up the perfect segue for me. In the last segment, we were talking about submitting short stories and how getting feedback. And we talked about a short story you submitted to Shadow Alley Press, and how they didn't like it as a short story, but basically said, this might make a novel. So let's talk about Mark Stallings, the novelist. And I personally think this is your best stuff, what you wrote for Shadow Alley Press. So let's talk about that book.
Elements, yeah. So that particular scenario, I wrote specific to Lit RPG, specific for Viridian Gate Online. And what that did, because I wrote an Asian flavored short story, James said, hey, I really think that wuxia is a market that you would do really well in. And so come up with an idea based on that your background in martial arts and what you did in this short story, and give me an idea for a series. And so I flew out to Lexington, Kentucky, and I said, hey, this is the loaf of bread. The challenge I have is that I don't know where to slice it. How do I turn this entire series idea into a set of novels? And so he asked me, hey, well, what do you think the first novel should be? And so I told him, and he's like, wow, that's a lot. I think that really we should take what you consider novel one and turn that into 3 novels, because you have to explain the world. You have to power up your heroes, and then they have to go find and defeat the bad guy, right? So it's a lot to happen in one book, unless I'm writing a Brandon Sanderson, tarantula killer. But the whole idea there is that just because I submitted something and I got a rejection on it, it gave the publisher an idea of what I can do, because I basically, for him, I cranked about 20,000 words in the space of 2 weeks, to be able to write that short story. And he's like, that's really plot dense. I need something simpler. I wrote a second story, and then he's like, okay, you have a work ethic. I mean, and you can actually produce on ideas. Let's take it further. Let's see what you can do with a series. And so, that's where the Silver Coin Saga was born.
And for the viewers out there, that's important to publishers, because they don't want, when they bring on an author they haven't published before, they're investing time and their own personal time as the editor-in-chief of the house in you, and they're also investing the publishing house's assets in you as an author. And they don't want to do it for just one novel. They don't want to publish, and I know people, we both know people, Mark, who Chris has published, and they wrote a book 2 years ago, and Chris is still waiting for the next book, because they just don't ever seem to get around to writing it. And I'm not saying Chris wishes he hadn't published it, but the publisher wants to make money too, and he wants you to make money, and the way to make money is to keep writing books and publishing books before your audience forgets who you are. So having a good work ethic and showing that I can crank words out, I can meet deadlines, that's important to a publisher. So
and it's also important, I think, that a publisher also takes into account, like my book came out during COVID, and life happened, and you get into a series of events where the second book gets delayed, whether it's you're cranking out different projects or writing short stories, or your daughter gets in a car accident. I mean, the publisher it's entering into a collaboration. And so when you're looking at where am I going to submit a short story, or where am I going to submit a pitch for a novel, or even I've written a whole manuscript, where do I send it? You want to look for a publishing house that will support you as a collaborator. I mean, this isn't just a client business relationship. They are investing time in you. And it's especially more important if you get into like traditional publishing. Those big houses are going to spend a lot of money on you, and they want to make sure you're around for the longevity. And so, yes, there's all the horror stories about people getting bounced after their second book doesn't sell well. But that's a whole different game. Fred can talk about in a later segment about marketing your own stuff too. But getting back to anthologies, you want to find a publishing house that puts out anthologies that do well, right? Not every anthology is going to light the world on fire. But what you want is you want to look at reviews, you want to look at readership, and you want to see sales rankings, where you want an anthology that's actually going to uh, have some staying power. You look at the beginning anthologies of the Four Horsemen. I mean, they still sell. I mean, the Last Brigade universe that I'm in with William Allen Webb. I mean, I got a check this month. It pays out every month, and it will in perpetuity. But you got to find those publishing houses that will support you, not just in what your goals are to just have a published. I mean, you can be through KDP, you can be a published author right now.
And not
But
become
what you
known.
want is you want to be with a publishing house that will support you and nurture you and grow. I mean, through the efforts I had with James for the Elements, I basically got a master's class in novel. I mean, he taught me how, to approach dialogue differently and description, and basically structure a story that will entertain. And so, like I said, your publisher is your biggest fan, and they want to help you put out the best product. So you need to find a publisher that will do that, and talk to other authors that they publish and make sure that they do that. Yeah, you can see some of the anthologies I've been in here. Set the Terms, You Pay We Slay, Talons and Talismans. It takes all kinds of set in Kevin Steverson's salvage title universe. Hellcats was actually an anthology that was a charity. A woman was losing her house, so a bunch of authors submitted short stories to try to raise money to help her keep her house.
And Mark mentioned an important fact. What is the purpose? Why is this publisher putting an anthology out that you're submitting a story for? Is it to find and support new authors, or is it to support his existing series? Because, he wants, and Chris is always looking to find, Chris Kennedy, I'm talking about my boss, one of Mark's bosses, is always looking for new authors, and anthologies is a perfect way for him to find those. But he also wants to keep the Four Horsemen universe alive, and periodically putting an anthology out, slide that anthology and put it out in a month where he doesn't have any other Four Horsemen books that are going to be coming out, keeps the Four Horsemen universe in front of its readers and keeps interest in that universe. So you have to understand why the publisher is putting the anthology out. And yeah, I've submitted stories to for charitable anthologies before. All of them were rejected, frankly, because I'm personally not very good at writing short stories, because I like to build worlds. I like to create characters, and my short stories are like 25 and 30,000 words long, which, no, that doesn't work. Which is the reason why I had Mark on, because he does such a good job of it. But it's also easier if you're writing in an established universe.
It is. Yes.
Anyways, I've written 3 short stories in my life. Only one of them has been picked up for an anthology, and Bill might eventually put that next anthology out. So, anyway, I guess I want the last right here before we go to the break is the different ways that anthologies pay out. Can you talk about that?
Okay, yeah. So some of the anthologies they pay out for a 1 year period. They'll pay 4 quarters basically. That's how Chris Kennedy does it, and then your rights revert back. The publisher retains the right to keep selling the anthology, and you can do whatever you want to with your story. The other anthologies, like if you look at like the Last Brigade universe, because I'm writing a story in somebody else's intellectual property, that story will never revert, and Bill pays me in perpetuity. And so those are really the two major things. The one thing I really want everybody to consider is that those rights reversions, when will you get your story back, or do you get your story back? How are you getting paid? I mean, because that's very important. And then the third one is, what rights are you actually giving up? I mean, so are you giving up all foreign language rights? Are you giving up media rights? If you were to take your story, and once it reverts back to you and you go get a TV deal, do they have hooks into that? I mean, just be very careful of what rights you're giving to that publisher, and you want to give
Mark,
them
we
the
need to
minimum.
This is Fred Hughes, and the next chapter will finish this discussion in just a moment. And we're back, and Mark was rambling on about making sure you're protected in your contract. So let's go back and finish that, because that's important, because there are other rights. You know, when you sign a contract, and this isn't only applicable to short stories, it's applicable to other works that you might submit, whether it's a poem, whether it's a full-fledged novel, you can end up inadvertently signing the rights over to an entire series to a publisher and not realize it when you sign your first contract. So it's important to understand the fine print. So go ahead and continue that thought, Mark.
Well, I mean, you look at like Spotify just recently put their foot in their mouth when they released some terms of service where they actually had authors release the rights for derivative works. And so not a lot of people are, oh, well, what does that mean? That means that I could take, if I had the rights for derivative works for Fred's Prince of Britannia series, I could go ahead and pick a character in there because he's given me those rights, and I can go ahead and start producing books using his characters in his world. And so you want to be very careful as an IP holder of protecting your own stuff. So look very carefully at what they're doing. Talk to the publisher. You know, if they want all of your rights, audio, video, uh, print, and ebook, ask them, are you going to do an audio book of this work? If you're not, then I'm not giving you the rights. If you're not going to be doing video, where you do either AI or actors to produce your novelization or characterization of your short story, then don't give them media rights. I mean, you should be very protective. You only want to dole out the bare minimum because you want to retain all of the rights for your stuff, and then find out, well, when does it revert? If you do not do anything with my rights, when do I get it back?
And not
And
only
so
that,
most publishing companies are, well, sorry about that.
no,
Most
go
publishing
ahead.
companies, they have a clause in their contract where they if they don't do something with it within a year, it's back to you. And you want to make sure that that kind of clause is in there. Auto reversion, not where you ask for it.
And another reason why I wanted Mark on is, as far as the legalities are concerned, he's one of the smartest guys I know about contracts in this business. But that also brings up another point, and that's about, and I'm not going to, I signed the contract, and I can't emphasize how happy I've been with Chris Kennedy as my publisher. And he's published will publish all 9 books in the Prince of Britannia series. But when I signed the contract with him, I did not realize when I signed the contract that I was giving him the rights to right of first refusal is what it's termed in my contract, of any book I write that's in the Prince of Britannia series. So if I write a book,
Yes.
in Prince Britannia, I have to submit it to him first. and then he can decide whether or not he's going to publish it or not. And if he does, that's fine. If he doesn't, it reverts back to me, and I can do something else with it. But if I say it's a Prince of Britannia book, he has the rights to it. I didn't realize that at the time. Now, it hasn't been an issue, but you live and learn. And my next series, the follow-up, The Prince of Britannia, I've already discussed it with him that he won't have exclusive rights to that series. He'll have rights to, let's say, the first 3 books in that series. And then after that, we'll negotiate another contract and other things. So look at your contracts well. Take it to a lawyer. There are lawyers that specialize in literary, and drop me a note. I've shared my Facebook address and everything else more than enough. Drop a note to me, and I can offer you advice. I also know a lot of people who are really smart about this stuff, and like Mark, another friend of ours, Kevin Eikenberry, who are really good at literary contracts, and I can get you help. So don't face it alone. So, in parting, Mark, it's time for you to pitch your stuff. What's up next for Mark?
All right.
Where are you going to be, by the way, in case people want to see you? Because I know you just did a grand tour.
Grand tour, yep. So, and while I'm a dictator, so while I was on a tour, I went down to Tupelo Con in Tupelo, Mississippi. I got to visit a fellow author down in Biloxi, Mississippi. And then I went up to Mid-South Con in Memphis. And so while I was on the road, I dictated 26,000 words for book 2 of the Silver Coin Saga. I'm 9 chapters away from completion. I have a slight road trip this weekend that I'm looking to finish it out. Yep, there's my book right there. So I just finished a short story that takes place between books 1 and 2. The Harvest Moon. It's with the editor right now, so I'm looking forward to getting that out.
So
It is up on my Patreon right now. If you like the early version of it, the unpolished, unvarnished version.
So is that a primer for the
Patreon? You can.
That's a primer for the pump.
What's that?
That short story is a primer.
Primer for the pump. Yes. It is. It is. And there's good information. I introduce a character in the short story that will be in book 2. And then where you're going to find me, you can find me online, markstallings.com. I will be at Fantasy here in 9 days. That's in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you're there, stop by. I will be at LibertyCon in June. And I work in the info booth at DEF CON, the big hacker conference in August in Las Vegas.
And I'll also point out that you've heard me mention, and I think Mark's even mentioned Superstars Writer Seminar, which is in Colorado in February. You know, I talked about me going. Mark just doesn't like go every year. He's like the head of, of the volunteers who take care of the audio visuals for Superstars.
Audio visual, yep. I work on the audio visual team.
So he's another one of the many, I shouldn't say Chris Kennedy, because you're so much more than just Chris Kennedy, but one of the group of people that support the Superstars Writer Seminar. And frankly, a lot of what we talked about today is stuff that's brought up and talked about at Superstars. And if you're a new author, look into it. I can't recommend enough, what you can learn there, and more importantly, the contacts you can make there, the people you can meet. Well, that wraps up this week's show. Didn't even get to ask Mark about some of the other things, but when you start talking about books, that's how it ends up. Anyway, thanks for watching. That's this week's show. I'm Fred Hughes, and this is the next chapter.